Welcome, whispers after midnight. Tonight's story begins with something small and easily ignored. A plantation dog scratching at the dirt, tugging at a scent that shouldn't exist. What it unearthed was a hidden chain, buried on purpose. And once it came into the open, fear spread faster than whispers in the slave quarters. The plantation stood deep in the American South during the mid-19th century, a time when slavery was not only legal but violently enforced through fear, punishment, and secrecy. Isolated from nearby towns, the land stretched for miles, cotton fields on one side, dense woods and swampland on the other, creating a natural prison where escape was nearly impossible. The main house sat elevated, watching over the quarters like a silent judge, while the slave cabins were crowded together near the edge of the fields, deliberately placed where suffering could be monitored. This story unfolds during the final decades before emancipation, when tensions were at their highest. Rebellions, escapes, and whispered resistance made overseers increasingly paranoid. New rules were enforced without explanation, and punishments became more severe and more hidden. Anything that hinted at past violence, especially something buried, was dangerous because it suggested crimes never recorded in ledgers. By the time the dog began digging, the plantation already carried a reputation for cruelty. People spoke in lowered voices, avoided certain areas of the land after sunset, and understood that some parts of the soil were not meant to be disturbed. The buried chain belonged to that era of silence, placed there years earlier, during a time when pain was erased by dirt and memory was forced underground. The dog belonged, at least in name, to the plantation, but in truth, it followed one enslaved man almost everywhere. The man was quiet, observant, and known for keeping his head down, the kind of person overseers overlooked because silence felt like obedience. But the dog never left his side. It slept outside his cabin, waited at the edge of the fields, and appeared whenever he was assigned to distant or isolated work, in a place where enslaved people were denied family, ownership, and comfort. That bond was rare and quietly powerful. Animals often sensed what humans were forced to ignore. The dog reacted to the man's moods, growling when he was afraid, whining when he was hurt, refusing to leave when punishments were handed out. Some whispered that the dog had once belonged to a runaway, passed down unintentionally like a living memory. Others believed the dog stayed close because it recognized something broken but familiar in the man. This connection unsettled the overseers, enslaved people forming emotional attachments, especially to something that could move freely, was seen as dangerous. Dogs could roam, dig, listen, and return. They could cross invisible boundaries that humans could not. And when the dog began fixating on one patch of land, circling it, clawing at the dirt, and refusing to be pulled away, the enslaved man understood before anyone else did. Whatever lay beneath that soil was calling to both of them, and it was not meant to be found. It started subtly, small things most people would have ignored. The dog began avoiding certain paths through the plantation, refusing to cross a narrow stretch of land near the far cotton rows. When forced toward it, it would freeze, ears low, tail stiff, letting out low, uneasy growls that didn't sound like fear of a person, but fear of a place. At night, it would wake suddenly, pacing outside the cabin, staring toward the fields as if listening to something no one else could hear. Then the behavior changed. One afternoon, while workers labored under the sun, the dog broke from the shade and ran straight toward an isolated patch of ground near the tree line. It began circling, sniffing obsessively, clawing at the dirt with frantic energy. Not playful digging, desperate digging. The soil flew behind it, as if it were trying to reach something buried fast, before someone could stop it. People noticed. Enslaved workers exchanged uneasy looks. Some stepped back. Others whispered prayers. In slave folklore, animals reacting to the earth like that meant death, buried suffering, or unmarked graves. Elders said dogs could smell old blood in the soil, chains rusting beneath the ground, and places where screams were swallowed by dirt and time. When the overseer approached, the dog growled and snapped, a dangerous act on a plantation. Animals weren't allowed defiance, but the dog refused to move, standing over that patch of earth like a guardian or a warning. By sunset, everyone knew something was wrong with that spot of land. The dog wasn't acting wild. It was acting certain. And on plantations, certainty like that only came from one thing, something buried that was never meant to be seen again. The soil was shallow and soft, as if it had been disturbed before. With every scrape of the dog's paws, the dirt gave way too easily, releasing a damp, metallic scent that carried even before anything was visible. The dog suddenly stopped digging, not from exhaustion, but hesitation, sniffing intensely, then stepping back as if it had reached something it respected. Or feared. That's when the metal showed itself. Just beneath the surface, half caked in mud and roots, a length of iron chain emerged. It was thick, heavy, and rusted deep brown, the kind forged not for animals or tools, but for human restraint. As more dirt was pulled away, the chain revealed links bent out of shape, some twisted as though they had been strained under extreme force. One end disappeared deeper into the ground, while the other was attached to a corroded iron collar. Silence fell across the field. No one needed to ask what it was. Enslaved people recognized it instantly. Chains like these were whispered about, rarely seen, and never spoken of openly. They were used for punishments meant to leave no witnesses. Punishments carried out away from the quarters, away from records, away from mercy. The overseer reacted too quickly. He shouted for the dog to be restrained, ordered the soil kicked back over the find, and demanded everyone return to work. But it was too late. Too many eyes had seen it. Too many memories had been stirred. The earth had already given up its secret. What terrified the plantation wasn't just the chain itself, but the fact that it had been buried deliberately. Not lost, not forgotten, hidden, and whatever, or whoever, it had once held was still unaccounted for. Up close, the chain looked ancient, even by plantation standards. The iron was swollen with rust, each link rough and pitted, as if it had spent years rotting in damp soil. When it was lifted slightly from the ground, flakes of corrosion crumbled away, staining the dirt a dark reddish brown that resembled dried blood. This was not a tool that had been misplaced recently. Time itself had tried, and failed, to erase it. The links were uneven. Some were stretched wider than others, warped by force that suggested panic, resistance, or prolonged strain. One section was bent almost flat, as though someone had thrown their weight against it again and again, At the end of the chain hung an iron collar, partially collapsed inward, its edges jagged and cruel. The size of it told a story on its own. It had not been made for livestock. It had been made to fit a human neck. There were no identifying marks, no plantation stamp, no initials, another unsettling detail. Overseers usually marked their property, even instruments of punishment. This chain had been deliberately left anonymous, untraceable, as if whoever used it never intended it to be seen again. The lack of markings made it feel less like equipment and more like evidence. Those who looked closely noticed something else: traces of old fabric fibers caught in the rusted links, fused there by time and moisture. Cloth from a shirt, a collar. Maybe rope bindings added for extra restraint. It suggested the chain had not simply restrained someone briefly, it had held them for a long time. The chain told its story without words. It spoke of isolation, prolonged suffering, and a punishment meant to break more than the body. And as it lay exposed to the air for the first time in years, the plantation felt different, like the past had reached up through the soil, refusing to stay buried any longer. Expand 6 keynote fully detailed 6. Immediate reactions from the enslaved people. The moment the chain was fully visible, a hush swept through the field, thick, heavy, and unmistakable. Work stopped without anyone being told to stop. Hose rested in the dirt. Hands froze mid-motion. Eyes locked onto the iron as if looking away might invite something worse. For the enslaved people, this was not a mystery to be solved. It was a truth recognized on sight. Some stepped back instinctively, crossing themselves or whispering prayers under their breath. Others refused to look at all, turning their faces away as if the chain might recognize them. Elders stiffened, their expressions darkening, not with surprise, but with memory. A few had seen similar restraints years earlier on other plantations, or had heard stories passed down in fragments, always unfinished, always ending in silence. Whispers spread fast but quietly. Names were murmured, people who had been punished and never returned, workers who were said to have been sold south or sent away. Explanations everyone knew were lies. The chain gave those absences shape. It suggested that some people hadn't gone anywhere at all. Fear mixed with anger. Not loud anger, dangerous anger, but the kind that tightens the jaw and burns behind the eyes. The discovery confirmed what many already believed, that there were punishments worse than the whip, and places on the plantation where the rules didn't apply because no one was meant to survive them. Most unsettling of all was the shared understanding that this discovery put everyone at risk. Knowing too much had consequences. Seeing something meant to stay buried could bring punishment, disappearance, or worse. The enslaved people didn't need threats to feel afraid. The chain itself was the warning. And as they slowly returned to work under watchful eyes, one truth lingered among them. The ground beneath their feet was not just soil, it was a graveyard of secrets, and one of them had just been unearthed. The overseer moved fast, too fast for someone who claimed ignorance. His face tightened the moment he saw the chain, not with confusion, but recognition. He barked orders immediately, shouting for the dog to be dragged away and for the nearest workers to cover the hole. His voice cut through the silence with forced authority, the kind used when panic needs to be disguised as control. He insisted it was nothing. Old scrap. broken equipment. Something washed up from years ago, but his hands betrayed him. They trembled as he kicked dirt back over the exposed iron, grinding his boot down hard, as if pressure alone could push the past back into the ground. He warned everyone present, quietly at first, then louder, that speaking about what they saw would bring consequences. Work was resumed under threat. Extra guards were posted that evening near the fields. Lanterns burned later than usual. The area where the chain was found was suddenly declared off limits, claimed to be unsafe due to soft ground. Anyone assigned nearby was watched closely. The overseer even ordered fresh soil hauled in to level the patch, burying the remaining chain deeper than before. But the damage was done. The urgency of his response told a story he never spoke aloud. This was not an accident, not a forgotten tool. It was something he knew about, or something he had been trained never to acknowledge. His attempt to erase the discovery only confirmed what the enslaved people already understood: the chain was real, its purpose was real, and the plantation's darkest history had almost surfaced in full. No matter how much dirt he piled on top of it, the fear remained, because secrets don't stay buried once they've been seen. They spread, quietly, like rot beneath the floorboards. By nightfall, the chain had already taken on a life of its own. Despite threats and watchful eyes, whispers slipped through the quarters like smoke. Stories passed from cabin to cabin in fragments. No one repeated the full tale aloud, but everyone added something. Some said the chain had been longer than anyone saw, stretching deeper into the earth. Others claimed it was attached to something heavier still, something the overseer hadn't dared uncover. Names began to surface. People spoke of men who had vanished years earlier after defying orders, after failed escape attempts, after being accused, never proven, of organizing resistance. Officially, they had been sold or transferred. Unofficially, no one had ever seen paperwork. The chain gave those suspicions weight. It suggested that some punishments ended not with sale, but with silence. Fear twisted the rumors darker as they spread. A few swore the land near the chain stayed cold, even in daylight. Others said the dog howled at night, staring toward the buried spot as if guarding it. Elders warned younger ones not to walk near the tree line after sunset, insisting that places marked by suffering never truly empty. What made the rumors dangerous wasn't just what they implied, but how fast they traveled. Overseers could control bodies, but not imagination. The chain became a symbol, a reminder that the plantation's cruelty ran deeper than whips and ledgers. It hinted at crimes too severe to be written down. By the end of the week, even the overseer knew control was slipping. You could bury iron, but you couldn't bury what people believed they had finally seen. Proof that the plantation soil itself remembered, and that it might reveal more if disturbed again. As the rumors grew, so did the questions, quiet, dangerous questions no one dared ask out loud. What had the chain been used for? And why was it buried so far from the quarters? Hidden near land, no one worked after dark. Those who had been enslaved the longest understood before anyone explained it. Chains like this were not meant for transport or temporary restraint. They were designed for prolonged punishment. Restraint meant to isolate, exhaust, and erase a person without witnesses. The collar, the length of the chain, and the way it had been anchored suggested a human being had been confined to a single spot, exposed to weather, insects, hunger, and time itself. Some believed it was used for captives accused of planning escape or rebellion, people the plantation wanted broken quietly, away from others who might draw strength from their resistance. Others whispered that it had been used to make an example of someone whose suffering was meant to be remembered, but only by those forced to watch once, before the evidence was hidden. There was also darker speculation. The chain's placement near the tree line, close to low ground that flooded seasonally, suggested intent. If someone did not survive, the earth and water would help conceal the outcome. No grave marker, no record, just soil pressed flat and silence enforced. What chilled everyone most was the realization that this chain represented a system, not a single act. It implied planning, approval, and repetition. Someone had ordered it made. Someone had used it. Someone had decided to bury it rather than destroy it, because destruction leaves questions, but burial pretends nothing ever happened. The chain wasn't just a relic of punishment. It was proof of a method. And once that truth settled in, the plantation no longer felt like a place of labor alone, but a place where people could vanish, and the ground itself would be forced to keep the secret. As attention lingered on the chain, another unsettling realization surfaced. Where it had been buried mattered just as much as what it was. The patch of land near the tree line was already avoided long before the dog began digging. No crops were planted there. No tools were stored there. Enslaved people were rarely sent near it unless absolutely necessary, and even then, only during daylight. It was an unspoken rule. That ground was not meant to be disturbed. Older enslaved people recognized the signs immediately. On plantations, certain areas became forbidden, not by written orders, but by memory. Places where screams once carried too far, where punishments crossed into something final, where bodies were never meant to be found. The soil there was uneven, darker, and oddly compacted, as if it had been turned and pressed down more than once over the years. Some whispered that the land had swallowed more than chains, that it was a burial site used when death couldn't be explained away, when no sale or transfer could justify an absence. No headstones, no prayers, just quick dirt and silence enforced by fear. The chain's presence confirmed those suspicions. It had been buried not randomly, but deliberately, placed among other secrets already hidden below. What made the site truly forbidden was not superstition, but consequence. Anyone who dug too deep risked uncovering proof that would demand explanation, punishment, or retaliation. The overseer knew this. That's why guards were posted, why the area was suddenly restricted, why the dog was kept away. It wasn't about safety. It was about containment. The land itself had become an accomplice, and now that it had given up one secret, everyone feared it might give up more if disturbed again. After the discovery, the plantation no longer slept the same way. Nights grew tense, heavy with watchfulness. Lanterns that were once extinguished after dusk now burned late into the dark, casting long, nervous shadows across the fields. Overseers began pacing routes they had never bothered with before, boots crunching deliberately on gravel to remind everyone they were being watched. Extra patrols were assigned near the tree line. Guards stood silently with rifles resting against their shoulders, eyes fixed on the darkness rather than the people. It wasn't protection they were offering, it was intimidation. The message was clear: whatever had been uncovered during the day would not be allowed to surface again at night. In the slave quarters, fear took a different shape. Conversations dropped to whispers. Doors were shut earlier. Parents pulled children close and warned them not to wander, not to speak, not to ask questions. Every sound outside, a snapping twig, a distant footstep, a dog's low growl, felt like a warning. People lay awake listening, wondering who might be taken if the wrong rumor reached the wrong ears. The dog, once free to roam, was tied up at night. Its restless movements and sudden barking unsettled the overseers. Animals didn't follow rules, and that made them dangerous. When it strained against its rope, staring toward the forbidden patch of land, some took it as a bad omen, others as a reminder that something down there still wanted to be known. Fear settled over the plantation like a fog. Not loud, not chaotic, but constant. Everyone understood that the night was now a time for erasing mistakes. And once darkness fell, the ground that had already spoken once felt closer than ever to speaking again. The punishments didn't come all at once. They never did. They arrived slowly, deliberately, designed to confuse cause and effect so no one could point to the chain and say, "This is why." Officially, no one was punished for the discovery itself. Unofficially, nearly everyone felt it. Work hours were extended without explanation. Food rations were reduced. Minor mistakes, dropped tools, missed rows, slow movement, were met with sudden, disproportionate cruelty. Whippings increased, but carried out away from the quarters, beyond earshot. It was as if the plantation needed to reassert control, to remind everyone that curiosity led only to suffering. A few individuals were singled out: those who had been closest to the digging site, those known to talk too much, those who had asked questions in the past. One man was sent off to another plantation overnight, with no farewell. A woman was locked in a shed for days for a rule no one could clearly name. These punishments were never explained, which made them more effective. Fear thrives in uncertainty. Even the enslaved man connected to the dog was watched closely. His work assignments changed. He was separated from familiar faces. The dog was kept on a short leash, sometimes literally. The message was clear: bonds, instincts, and loyalty were dangerous things. The overseers called it discipline, but everyone else understood it as retaliation, not against rebellion, but against memory. The chain had threatened to expose something buried too deep, and the plantation responded the only way it knew how: by inflicting pain until silence returned. But silence after violence is never the same as before. It carries weight. And beneath that weight, the truth continued to press upward, waiting. Official plantation records told a clean, orderly story. Ledgers listed names, ages, values, transfers, and deaths reduced to brief, sterile lines. People disappeared on paper with simple explanations: sold, relocated, deceased. No causes given, no witnesses noted, no questions asked. What the records showed was control. What they never explained was loss. After the chain was uncovered, those gaps in the records became impossible to ignore. Names remembered in the quarters didn't match the neat columns in the books. Men who had worked the fields for years vanished, between seasons, with no sale documented. Others were marked as transferred, yet no neighboring plantation remembered receiving them. The paperwork existed, but the truth did not. The chain exposed the lie behind that order. It suggested a system operating outside the records, punishments and outcomes never meant to be written down, violence that left no survivor to testify, deaths that were easier to bury than to justify. The plantation's official history depended on a mission, and a mission was its greatest protection. Even overseers avoided discussing the past. When asked about earlier years, they changed subjects or responded with rehearsed phrases. Before my time. Don't know. Doesn't matter now. Those answers weren't ignorance, they were policy. Memory itself had become dangerous. The most haunting truth was this: the records were accurate only because they were incomplete. They told exactly what the plantation wanted remembered, and nothing more. The chain, rusted, anonymous, buried, represented everything the books refused to explain, and once seen, it made every missing name feel deliberate, every blank space feel heavy, and every page feel like part of a cover, upwritten in ink and silence. Not long after the discovery, the chain was gone. There was no announcement, no explanation, just absence. One morning, workers assigned near the tree line noticed the ground had been disturbed again. Fresh soil, flattened earth, wagon tracks pressed faintly into the mud and then erased. The spot where the dog had dug was smoother than before, as if someone had taken great care to make it look untouched, ordinary, forgettable. No one admitted to moving it. The overseer claimed ignorance, insisting there had never been any chain at all. He laughed when pressed, called it rumor, superstition, imagination fed by fear. But his orders told a different story. The area remained restricted. Guards continued their patrols, and the dog was kept away permanently, tied or locked up whenever it strained toward the fields. Among the enslaved people, the disappearance was more frightening than the discovery. A buried secret was dangerous, but a secret removed meant someone had acted deliberately, under cover of night, with authority and purpose. The chain hadn't been destroyed publicly. It hadn't been documented. It had simply vanished, as if it had never existed. Some believed it had been taken elsewhere, reused, perhaps because cruelty wastes nothing. Others feared it had been buried deeper, alongside things no one was meant to find. A few whispered that it had been thrown into the river, where rust and water could finish the erasure. But even without the chain, its presence lingered. People avoided the spot more than ever. The soil there felt wrong, unsettled, like a wound stitched too quickly. The disappearance didn't bring relief. It brought confirmation that someone was still actively protecting the plantation's darkest truths. The chain was gone, but the knowledge of it could not be removed so easily. Even after the chain disappeared, the plantation never returned to normal, because fear like that doesn't leave when the evidence is gone. It settles in. It changes how people walk, how they speak, how they remember. The ground itself felt different, as if everyone knew it had revealed something once and might do so again. People avoided the tree line entirely now, not because they were told to, but because instinct warned them away. Children were pulled back if they wandered too close. Conversations stopped when footsteps approached. At night, silence became heavier than sound, broken only by the distant creak of wood or the low cry of insects. Every noise felt like a reminder that the past was still close, just under the surface. The enslaved man never looked at that patch of land again. The dog, once restless and alert, grew quiet, watchful, subdued, as if it had done what it was meant to do and paid the price for it. Some said animals knew when a boundary had been crossed, when a truth had been revealed and punished. What lingered most was certainty. Certainty that the plantation hid more than it admitted. Certainty that disappearance was not accidental. Certainty that the soil held memories no ledger would ever record. The chain didn't need to be seen anymore. Its absence spoke louder than its presence ever had. It lived on in glances exchanged without words, in prayers whispered at night, in the understanding that some horrors don't need to repeat themselves to remain powerful, because once the earth gives up one secret, everyone knows it remembers the rest.